Maybe I don't want you in here because you're just going to make fun of me.
Okay, well, I can hear you.
Hello, everybody. It's been a long time since I've done any of this. We've moved across the state of Texas, started a new full-time job, got settled in the house, had several projects in the house, and well, it's just been a long time since I've been able to do anything out here in the shop. Plus, the shop hasn't been ready for me to do anything in here. I've been working on it, but as you can see behind me, it's still disorganized. It's a bit of a mess, but this is real life, and that's how things go. Everything's not always ideal, so we're just going to work through it. What we got right here is I got two hook-matched walnut slabs we're going to make a kitchen island out of. I kind of cheated because they had twists and turns in them. I took them to the local cabinet shop. They ran them through their drum sander and got them nice, flat, and straight for me. And it only cost me $15. 1-5. So now that I've got these back in my shop, I've got to take the bark off. I got to clean out any spots where the wood is soft and rotten. Clean up any bark inclusions that we have. Address any of the cracks. Make these fit together. Join them, and then install them. You can do this a number of ways. People use grinders, wire wheels, hammer, chisel, whatever works for you, whatever you find easiest. I bought this draw knife off of Amazon. It costs less than 20 bucks, and it works really good. I'll get the most of it, the majority of it with this. Then I'll clean it up with hammer and chisel, maybe a little wire wheel on my drill or grinder. So it came decently sharp. I haven't had to put it across the stone. And this bark comes right off. And this is why we want to get the bark off, because the bark wants to split from the wood. Eventually, it will crack away from the wood and come off. So there's ways to deal with it to try to make it permanent through epoxy and other different things. But even with that, over a long extended period of time, several years, I just don't trust it. If you don't trust it, don't do it. If other people make it work and you're not comfortable with it, you do you. Do what you're comfortable with. I get pretty aggressive when there's plenty of bark to go through. As it gets closer to the wood, you'll feel it. I can feel it starting to draw, have some resistance on this draw knife. So I'll just increase my angle, make shallower passes, and it's almost like whittling. You'll see little curls come up. That's about as much as I'm going to get with the draw knife. Now I'm going to put a wire wheel in the drill. See if I can't clean it up though. Using a very soft wire. This is brass. So here I tried to use the joiner to get a good joint on the bottom. This is a horrible idea. It's way too tall for this fence. I can't get it to be stable. It's way too heavy for my little joiner. It wants to make it rock. Horrible idea.
So what I ended up doing was getting my track saw out. I've bought this Craig track saw. I used to have just a little AccuCut sled that you attached a normal circular saw to, and went ahead and bought this track saw. I'll have a review on it out on a whole new video pretty soon. I put these slabs together to where they'd fit, and then just started running my saw a couple times to where it took off a little piece of both with the kerf of the saw blade. And that's how I ended up joining these two slabs together. It worked out pretty well. The next step is actually putting them together, joining them, gluing them. So I got this dowel jig. It's a great jig. It's self-centering. So once you get it set, you can lock it in place and forget about it. Then I'm going to get out my little combination square and just kind of map out where I'm going to put it, making a couple marks where I'm going to drill some holes for some dowels, spacing them about 8 inches apart, and trying to remember where these voids are. There were a couple spots that I had to clean up from softwood, the rotten wood, and obviously you can't put dowels in a void, so just had to go back and remind myself, make better marks. I was using a pencil at first, so I changed over to a pen to know which marks I'd need to be looking at when I put my dowel jig together. Here I flipped over the slab, and remember this is a self-centering jig, so I don't have to worry about top and bottom, so I was just able to flip it instead of rotate it, and just going along finding these marks. There you can see one of those voids I was talking about earlier, so I skipped over it, found the correct mark, and using a drill stop on this jig so I don't drill too deep. And once I completed this one, I just moved over to the next slab and did the same thing there. And then, yes, our favorite part, at least not mine, it's time for the glue up. This part always makes me nervous. I feel like I screw this part up from time to time, but just got all my tools together, got everything I'd need right there beside me, and I used a little 1x4 on the back there. You can see where I rested the slab so that the bars of my clamps wouldn't gouge the slab live edge there. The plan was to leave this live edge intact and have it be part of the piece, but that little crotch area right here closest to the camera, as it turns out, that exposed the cabinets underneath when I went and test fitted it in the kitchen. So I'll end up having to build a form and add some epoxy to this. It wasn't part of my original plan, but I had to adapt and overcome, and this is what we ended up having to do. But back to what we're doing right now, I've been picking up a parallel clamp every time that I go to the store. So when I go to one of the box stores, I go and look and see what parallel clamps they have in stock, and I just pick up one at a time. These longer ones usually cost around $50 a piece, so buying 5, 6, 8, 10 of these at a time is pretty expensive, and I really don't want to do that. So I've just been picking up one at a time when I go and pick up other stuff, and I'll tell you, they do make a big difference, and they are worth the money. I'll do a review on which ones I like best in another video also. So here you see what I was talking about just a minute ago. I had to build a form. I used MDF and plywood and lined it all with tuck tape so that it wouldn't stick to the resin, or rather the resin wouldn't stick to it. I dyed it black, and I'm adding the length up here. So this is not the look I was going for, adding a sharp line where the wood ends and the resin meets. That's not what I would have planned for. I would have planned for a more natural look, but this is what I came up with. Here I'm using a deep cast epoxy because this slab is a little over 2 inches thick, and pouring it in here, really I could have poured it from just the one side, but for whatever reason I enjoyed watching it flow from both sides, even though there's not going to be any visual change in what we're looking at. So pouring it, looking for any leaks, and it came out pretty good. The last pour of that epoxy, I added some bronze metallic to it, and that helped it blend in a little bit more with the wood, And actually, as it was settling, it almost looked like wood grain. I'll get back to more on that later. So here I've marked the slab with pencil marks, and I'm going through and doing my sanding. I'm going to finish this table with Rubio monocoat, and Rubio monocoat says not to go above 120. 120 is the recommended grit, and it says if you do go above 120 to definitely not go above, I believe it's 180. I can't remember if it's 180 or 150. I'll have to get back to you on that. But I think I went up to 150 on this, and the sanding, of course, just takes a long time. I'm not going to make you watch all of it, but here's my favorite part of every project. Putting on the finish, watching the color and the figure pop as it gets wet. And this Rubio monocoat is a wonderful product. It is a little bit pricey. You don't get very much of it, but it goes a long way. I barely had 20 milliliters in the bottom of this cup, and it just about gives me an entire layer on top of this table. I do think I had to remix just a little bit more to finish it off, but it bonds with the wood and makes it, I don't know if it's waterproof or water resistant, but it actually bonds. It does not sit up on top of the wood as an additional layer that can be gummy and is a real pain to try to refinish if you're ever touching it up later in life, a couple years down the road, if there's a couple scratches or marks from wear and tear. So I mixed it up in this cup, and it's a 3-to-1 ratio. I'm using the hardener with it, the accelerator rather, and I'm just spreading it out with a Bondo spreader here. And that seems to be the way to get the most coverage out of it. You can use a buffer or you can use a rag, but then you lose a good bit of this pricey material, this pricey product, into that medium there, that buffer or that rag. So by using this Bondo spreader, I'm able to get as much out of it as I can, and you can see it goes on there. Now, as I was putting this on there, I started to see some waves in the wood. You can see it there in the glare of the light, and I started to panic thinking, wow, I really did some uneven sanding. But it was an unnecessary panic on my part, because you can see that everywhere that you see one of those glary lines in the light is also where you see some figure in the wood, the knots, the different ways that the tree grew, and that's just an optical illusion. So it wasn't entirely because of uneven sanding. I won't say there wasn't any uneven sanding. I'm not a pro at this yet, but I'm working on it. That's the whole point of this, right? So while I'm spreading out this Rubio monocoat and buffing it and just making sure everything's got a nice uniform layer of product on it, I'll tell you about some of the problems that I had with this project. So when I had it in the form and put all that epoxy on here, some of the epoxy came over onto the top, of course, almost unavoidable, but I sanded that and planed it and got rid of that epoxy. So there was a thin layer of epoxy that was able to get under the wood, and I didn't think about it and I didn't plan for it, didn't realize I was going to have a problem with it later. But as this table sat in my workshop for several days, it started to cup. And by the end of the project, when I was finished with it, there was at least a 1/4 inch cup on the bottom there on the left hand side of the screen. Up here at the top, I think the epoxy stabilized it, but there at the bottom, where there's not as much epoxy, the table had a low spot in the middle and high spots on both sides, and if I laid a level across it, there was at least a 1/4 inch gap underneath a level that I could almost stick my little finger underneath it. So that really bothered me. How I fixed it is when I was done with the table before I finished it here, I flipped it over, and on the bottom of it I installed some C channels. Uh, Inlaid those C channels into the bottom using a process similar to what I've seen Cam use on Blacktail Studios here on YouTube, where he does a ton of walnut slab work and does great work, much better than me. He's an inspiration. So by using those C channels, I was able to straighten it out a little bit, not entirely. I didn't want to crack it or break it or add undue stress, but I was able to accomplish some of what I needed and getting it a little bit more flat. And just about done wiping off the excess. Here's how it looks inside the house once it was installed. And here's a little trick I did with the epoxy to make it simulate a wood knot in the wood. I just ran a stick through it when it was a little gummy, and there you go. Here's what it looks like in the house. My wife loves it. I love it. We're really happy with it. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe if you got anything out of this, and I'll see you next time.